much for joining us today. I am really excited to have you all here to hear from our really amazing lineup of presenters about nature-based infrastructure and the journey that we are currently on to get funding for it in Texas. First, just a little housekeeping. Please keep your video off and your mic muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, you can totally put them in the chat at the bottom right anytime during the event, and we will get to them in our Q&A session after our presenters. Now that that is done, let me introduce myself so you all know who you're talking to. My name is Elena Ladd, and I am a senior at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm currently studying sociology and pursuing a certificate in environment and sustainability. And this semester, I have had the wonderful pleasure of interning with the Clean Water team at Environment Texas. Going into this position, I pretty much knew next to nothing about nature-based infrastructure. But after learning and getting to talk to some really cool stormwater engineers and stormwater planning managers and environmental activists, I have become increasingly passionate about it because I think it's such an awesome solution for some of the problems in Texas. First, I just wanted to give you all a quick background on what exactly nature-based infrastructure is, just in case you were like me and a few months ago and don't really know what it's about or just need a refresher to know why we're all so excited about it. And also, just a quick side note, nature-based infrastructure sometimes is called by other names like green infrastructure or low-impact development. So if you hear any of those terms, we're all talking about the same thing. So Texas has a little bit of a stormwater issue. Stormwater runoff pollutes our water, and it can lead to flooding that damages our communities and puts people in danger. I was actually quite shocked to learn that Texas consistently leads the country in flooding-related deaths. And gray infrastructure, which is like our most common infrastructure right now, such as pipes, levees, and drains, is designed to move water really quickly, which is crucial in torrential downpours. But nature-based infrastructure can actually help water soak into local soil, which helps prevent flooding in the first place. In fact, green infrastructure techniques like rain gardens and constructed wetlands can absorb up to 90% of rainwater, and that works by mimicking natural processes. So water can be clean and captured and absorbed where it falls. Types of nature-based infrastructure include bioswales, rain gardens, urban tree canopies, constructed wetlands, and green roofs. And so not only can all these things reduce flooding, clean pollutants from our water, and even help increase rates of groundwater recharge, they also provide these really beautiful green spaces filled with vegetation that can be used as recreational and educational sites. And I know I'm saying all this really cool stuff, but the question is, does it actually work? And one of my favorite things that I learned about it that really show the resiliency of green infrastructure is during Hurricane Harvey in Houston, the one bayou that didn't flood was the one protected by green infrastructure. And on top of all of that, it can really save money, not only by avoiding the thousands of dollars that come along with flood damage, but green infrastructure controls can cost less than conventional controls, and adding green techniques onto existing gray infrastructure can reduce public expenditures on stormwater infrastructure. And I don't want to talk your ears off because I have some really cool speakers for you guys today. So I'm just going to introduce them real quick. First, we have Trinia Harris, who is the Stormwater Program Manager from Lubbock, Texas. She is really hopeful about the future of nature-based infrastructure in Lubbock and is excited to talk to you all about her role. Second, we have Kathy Roacher, Stormwater Management Plan Administrator from Kyle, Texas, who has been a huge advocate for nature-based infrastructure and is here to tell us about her experiences. Then we have Mayor Dan Weidemeyer from Redland, Iowa, whose town got to build a nature-based infrastructure project that was from funding from the Sponsored Project Program, which is what we are trying to implement here in Texas. And finally, we have Anna Farrell-Sherman, Clean Water Associate from Environment Texas, who is doing a lot of work in legislation and policy to secure funding for nature-based infrastructure in Texas. And before we dive into the heart of the webinar, I'd like to turn it over to Anna. She is going to tell you all a little bit about a report that Environment Texas is releasing.
Farrell-Sherman, Clean Water Associate with Environment Texas, and I really enjoyed working on nature-based infrastructure and how we can invest in it to help protect our communities here in Texas. And I know that a lot of you on the webinar tonight are already experts in what nature-based infrastructure is and its many benefits. And one thing that's consistently come up in my conversations with y'all when we discuss how to increase the amount of nature-based infrastructure here in Texas is a lack of examples of how well these features work. So I'm really excited tonight to announce that we've released a report looking at investments in water infrastructure across the country with a focus on nature-based solutions. And this report highlights successful and innovative projects in each of the 10 US EPA regions, including work done here in Texas by the city of San Marcos and the city of Kerrville to help protect their local watersheds. And one of the biggest recommendations in this report is to invest in water infrastructure so that we can continue to see the benefits that these communities received. And so Elena is going to share a link to this report in the chat so that you can look more at the example projects that it highlights and use them to help promote your own work on nature-based infrastructure. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the really cool ways that we can continue to invest in it here in Texas. So those of you who fought for nature-based infrastructure in Texas know that funding can be hard to come by. Our Clean Water State Revolving Fund is supposed to support and fund green infrastructure projects through the Green Project Reserve, but overwhelmingly, the majority of those green projects are water and electricity efficiency projects rather than nature-based ones. Iowa, unlike Texas, has taken steps to fix that, and they've created this really cool sponsored project program that's going to be the focus of our webinar tonight that allows communities in Iowa to apply for nature-based infrastructure projects when they apply for loans through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It works through an interest rate break on the original loan, so it ends up being 2 projects for the price of 1. And we'll talk about this program more a little bit later, but it's already financed over 100 projects in communities across Iowa. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to bring it here to Texas. But before we go into more detail, I'd turn it back to Elena to introduce our other speakers for tonight so we can hear more about nature-based infrastructure and what these features bring to our communities.
Yeah, so our first speaker tonight is going to be Trinia Harris. I introduced her a little bit earlier, but she is a stormwater program manager from Lubbock, Texas. She's just going to talk a little bit about what she does there and the future that she's hopeful for green infrastructure there and how it will help Lubbock specifically.
Good afternoon. I'm very excited to participate in this webinar, and we're excited for the new things that are possibly going to occur within the city of Lubbock. I oversee the municipal separate storm sewer program permit, the phase 1 permit with the city of Lubbock, the MS4 permit, the construction general permit, and the multi-sector general permit for the city. I work with a great staff of 6 individuals that are very creative and looking at new ways and challenges that we address within the city. Some of the stormwater issues that we have, first off, our topography within the city of Lubbock. We're in a semi-arid region. We're very flat. We have an average of about 18 inches of rainfall a year. So when it rains, it usually rains really heavy at one time, and so we get a lot of rain quickly. So our streets become our drainage system. And in addition, the Lubbock has playa lakes, which are, for those of you that may or may not know what those are, they're naturally occurring detention basins. And we have those basically about one square mile, every square mile within the city of Lubbock. So most of those are dry, but they can be wet as well. So another thing that we struggle with that many other cities probably do as well is past engineering practices focused mostly on getting the water away quickly. And so there's a lot of concrete and a lot of concrete that gets in the way and it pushes the water away quickly. So we want to change the way that we look at things. And so I think a lack of knowledge is another thing that we struggled with, is people learning and knowing about green infrastructure and low impact development, and looking at different ways that we can install or redo our engineering practices. So our goal is to encourage the city to look at stormwater as an asset by incorporating green infrastructure and low impact development. So with this in mind, we approached our capital improvement projects engineers with the possible pilot project in Lubbock. And so timing was very important to be able to meet up with the budget to be able to put something in place to get this project going. So we were really excited that they were accepting of the ideal. So between the engineers and some consultants, we are looking at designing and installing a bioswale that's approximately 1,000 feet by 20 to 30 feet wide, in conjunction with a new residential development project. So we're collaborating with Texas Tech University. Texas Tech is also a co-permittee with the City of Lubbock. So we're going to collaborate with them to help. They're going to help support us and give us expertise in landscaping design and help design some of the projects, the plants and stuff that need to go in this bioswale. So they're also going to be monitoring, hopefully monitoring the pre and post intervention for water quality in and around the site, and also help us with some learning opportunities. As well, we're also looking at possibly piloting a program that would have permeable pavements in an alleyway. So we're really excited and hopeful of some of the things that we're looking at to see in Lubbock.
Awesome. Thank you so much for telling us about everything that y'all are getting done there. That is super exciting, and it shows a super good future for nature-based infrastructure. Next, we have Kathy Roacher, Stormwater Management Plan Administrator from Kyle, Texas, who, again, is a huge advocate for nature-based infrastructure and is here to tell us a little bit about her experiences advocating for that.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you guys. This is a topic I am really passionate about. I'm really hoping that in Kyle, we're able to start pushing it a lot more and making it more of a requirement. So that is what I'm working toward. But just a little bit of background on me. Prior to working for the city of Kyle, I was actually a TCQ field investigator for 16 and a half years. And of those 16 and a half years, the majority of those years were investigating water quality programs. So water quality is definitely a huge passion of mine, protecting water quality. And in the last 2 years with TCQ, I actually did MS4 audits for the state. So that's a little bit of background and how I ended up in Kyle being the stormwater program manager. One thing that really got me passionate about green infrastructure was I was born and raised in the San Marcos area. I call this area home. And over the years, it's been interesting because, you know, people, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that rainfall, I think definitely the rainfall data in this area has changed. We definitely have a lot more accurate numbers. You know, we are considered flash flood alley. And something that I've noticed in my lifetime owning property on the San Marcos River that does flood because it is right on the river. It's a gorgeous piece of property. You take the good with the bad. My family, it's been in my family for a number of years, and something that we've seen over the years is how now in, I would say, the last 8 years, the property, when we do get heavy rains, it floods a lot worse. And so something based on my experience with knowing the area, as well as knowing the San Marcos River, we're down from the Blanco, so we kind of get two punches on our property. But in my opinion, it's not so much that we're getting a lot more rain. What I'm seeing is we have a lot more impervious cover, starting in the hill country, starting in Wimberley, starting, you know, in those areas. And so what I'm seeing, I remember driving from San Marcos to Austin growing up. And the only way I knew I was in Kyle was because there was a water tower and a Dairy Queen. And now you drive through Kyle or from San Marcos to Austin, and you feel like you're just in one gigantic city. I remember growing up hearing, oh, one day the Austin, San Antonio area will turn into like Dallas, Fort Worth. And of course, back all those years ago, I thought there was no way. You used to get on 35 and there was miles of greenery. And nowadays you feel like it is growing into one big city. So it's been pretty amazing seeing this area grow, which is very exciting. And it does present us with a lot of opportunities to make big improvements. And that's something that I feel green infrastructure and nature-based designs will tremendously help this area. I guess some of the things that I'm running into or that, I see as keeping Kyle from getting more green-based infrastructure. First off is contractors. Luckily, I'm fortunate in Kyle, I get to do plan reviews. And so anytime I see an opportunity of a set of plans coming in, I will reach out to the developer. And because the city of Kyle, I actually was instrumental in getting the drainage utility passed, which was very controversial in Kyle, but we did pass it. And so I will actually get with developers and talk to them about because in the city of Kyle, if you install permeable pavers, we consider those 100% pervious. So it would not count toward your drainage utility fee, which would be huge. And sadly enough, contractors just don't take me, or developers are not really taking me up on the potential savings. I was really hoping after creating a drainage utility that we could use that as an incentive to get developers to install some of the green infrastructure. And so far that really hasn't occurred. And the only thing that I can it makes a lot of sense to me is developers come in and they develop a piece of property, but they're not staying there long term. They are not the ones that are going to be paying the drainage utility fee every month. Once the building is built and occupied, it's going to be up to the occupant that's going to be paying that drainage utility. So that's one of the problems that I've seen trying to use this method of using impervious cover in our drainage calculations to encourage this. And that's kind of what I think is happening there. Another issue I've run into with the city of Kyle and pushing this more is the misconceptions of maintenance requirements. A lot of people will a lot of people have misconceptions about maintenance requirements and saying how much these systems require maintenance. And then another one is a misconception is that they don't function properly, which I think in Texas as well, especially in Central Texas, I think we're now starting to get a very good handle on the different little tweaks that we possibly have to make to our green infrastructure versus up north that have been doing this for quite a bit longer. Of course, Texas has, but of course there's different terrain, there's different topographies, different soils and that kind of thing. So I think we're in Texas, especially in Central Texas, we're getting a better handle on the tweaks that we have to make to our green infrastructure so that we are still installing green infrastructure that meets our needs and our soils. Let me see. Also too, I guess I kind of touched on, developers when they're developing, they want to come in and they want to put in what is the cheapest and fastest thing they can put in. So trying to convince them to install green infrastructure, if they don't know enough about it, they haven't worked with a contractor that's installed it, they're just very hesitant. They are looking to get in, develop, and get out. And then of course the city is stuck with those decisions. I've gotten a lot of great lately, actually ever since I've been in the city of Kyle, our city council has been very open to ideas and suggestions. And we actually have very young, aspiring city council members, and they're very supportive of these ideas. So I think educating decision makers of the benefits of green infrastructure is huge. And like I said, luckily in Kyle, I'm getting a lot of support. So that's definitely in my favor. And that's those are kind of the roadblocks that I've hit. If I can go ahead and hand it over. Is there anything else that y'all would like me to touch on that I possibly didn't?
No, that was really, really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And then, yeah, so next will be Mayor Dan Weidemeyer from Redland, Iowa, who actually, we're talking a lot about some of the roadblocks we've run into, but what we're trying to pass is legislation that would help us look a little bit like the sponsored program project in Iowa. And in Redland, they actually had one of these and got to build it. And so we asking him to tell us a little bit about that experience and how it's helped.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Thanks for having me on. I feel pretty honored having the only out-of-state guy to be able to speak to you about it. But I've been mayor of Redland here for 8 years and was on the council for 14 years before that. So I've had a lot of experience with small town government. And I assure you that we're not a big metropolis. Lubbock would make us look like a pimple, but we're about we're actually 857 people is the size of our town. We're in a fairly rural community as much of Iowa is. We're fairly flat. The city of Redland is a fairly clean small town with all of its streets are cement curb and gutter, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you talk about drainage, it does. And one of the biggest reasons we got involved in, and it always comes down to money, but we were forced by the DNR to build a new sewer plant. So we used some of the state revolving fund, which I guess you have something like that in Texas. I'm not sure what it is. Once we talked to the state revolving fund, they said that if we improve the quality of water runoff, we could potentially be granted. Basically what they do is give you 10% of your loan. Our loan was $3,600,000. So we basically got, we were available to $360,000. We ended up getting $330,000 from the state revolving fund backwards through that. And then we also got another $70,000 from the WQI, and then the Northeast Iowa RC&D gave this another $5,000 to plant plants. But anyway, we looked at several projects through IDALS. Our Iowa Department of Agriculture had to get involved in something that would improve the quality of the water runoff. They were certainly wanted to be involved. So we had a crew of them up here, and we come up with 3 or 4 different projects. Our first one was like the lady from Lubbock said, we were going to put some bioswales in and use it to clean up the water before it even went down the street. We were a very long ways down that road to have that project done, and the citizens found out how big and how much of their property it would take up, and they nixed the project. Luckily, we had 2-3 more on that we had looked at possibles, and not that they were easy, but being in an ag community, we had an opportunity to put in a wetlands, which was one of the options. 2/3 of the city of Redland's runoff from the water would go this direction of town, to the southwest corner of town, which doesn't really matter to you guys. But what we ended up doing is we got improvement for basically no expense to the taxpayers, because they took it off of the interest that was due on our SRF loan to build a wetland. So number one, our wetlands improve the quality runoff of just the water running off the streets through approximately 3 miles of farm ground that it ran through, that we cleaned that all up. The city ended up buying 8 acres that was not in the city limits, and we had the DNR and IDLES also were worked with us on hand in hand in designing the project, and came up with a wetlands that's we used for education for the kids, for the school. We had to have a plan with the school district how we were going to use that, and we actually worked with the supervisors in our county, because we also have a drainage district board. This area enhances 1,900 acres of farm ground. So how our water runoff from the city affects that drainage district, and they got approved. And as most of you know, if you got to run through any kind of government, there's a lot of steps that don't happen overnight, and you got to be persistent to stay with the program. I don't think that the normal citizen in a small town, or even with the ag background, knows all the steps that go through. But I was to improve the water quality. I think I was really pushed hard in the last few years for the whole state to improve the water quality, and I think it is the reason we got involved is because of the money available through the revolving fund was the big kicker, and it did so many good things, but it was hard enough for our little town to be able to finance or afford a $3 million sewer plant. So, but we got it done. And I guess I got a lot to cover, but I know one of the things is that you want to get some legislation going to help agriculture, and I think designing it after our program would probably help a lot. I do want to say I spent 15 years, and I'm still in the ag spraying fertilizer application business. And I spent 15 years going to Edroy, Sinton, Texas, putting out fertilizer in the months of December and January. And I also have a son-in-law that was born and raised in Muleshoe, Texas, which is, they tell me, a suburb of Lubbock, but I don't believe it. So I do have some Texas connections.
Oh my, thank you so much. That was super informative. But yeah, so now Anna is going to talk a little bit about basically some of the struggles that we've had and how we want to pass something a little bit like this project here in Texas. But yeah, so Anna, you can take it away.
Mr. Mayor, for coming and sharing your story with us. We think it's a super, super exciting opportunity to be able to create a stormwater wetland on the outskirts of town that can filter stormwater pollution, help provide clean water to the river, and provide an educational opportunity and a way for agricultural interests and folks in town to come together and really preserve the ecosystem and the environment around the city. And it's a type of project we'd love to see more of here in Texas. We have so many opportunities to help protect our beautiful waterways and the amazing resources we have here in this state. We know that Texans love nature-based infrastructure and want to have more of it, but we also know that funding is scarce and that it's hard to get to finance even the wastewater treatment plants, even those essential wastewater infrastructure projects in our communities. The sponsored project program is an opportunity to change that. it gives folks who are applying for a wastewater treatment loan a free project on top of that original project to be able to create nature-based infrastructure. So the way that this works is when you apply for, let's say, a $3 million wastewater treatment loan, you can get an interest rate break, and if you spend that additional funds on a nature-based infrastructure project. So right now here in Texas, our Clean Water State Revolving Fund has financed only 2 green infrastructure projects in the past few years, both of which were actually water reclamation projects rather than actual nature-based infrastructure. We know we can do better. We know that we want to be financing these nature-based projects. And so Environment Texas is working to create this sponsored project program here in our state. We have met with all 3 members of the Texas Water Development Board who would be in charge of overseeing this program. And they all agree that it has the potential to really benefit our communities and to provide something that our communities are lacking. So right now we're working to generate support for the program among local communities and among experts throughout the state. We have a letter that we're working to spread around between experts to help show support for the program. Lena's gonna put a link to that letter in the chat now so that you can sign on and show your support for this program. And we know that this is a chance to make a big investment in our communities and in nature-based infrastructure. So I hope that you'll join us in supporting it. And now I think we're moving on to some question and answer. Elena, do we have any questions yet for our panelists?
Yeah, we have one question from Lisa. It's a question for Mayor Dan. She asked, what does the community think of the wetlands, how the wetlands project turned out, and is it a good asset for your town? Oh, I think you're muted still. I think you're still muted. I'm sorry.
Mute. Okay.
Okay, there you
There we go.
Perfect.
The community, we've actually received about several awards for our project, and we were lucky enough to get the Iowa Department of Ag Secretary Mike Nag was here to see it. Our community has our community has really jumped into it. We had lined up for all the 5th and 6th graders from our local school to go out and plant plugs into the prairie grass that was planted out there. The COVID affected us there, so what we did is we signed up a bunch of volunteers and anybody that felt comfortable with coming out, and we actually, I think we had 65 people come out and help us planting plugs along the bank sides. This 8 acres that we put this on was farm ground, and the farmer, we had to negotiate with the farmer and purchase it, which he was very receptive to, because it was just like Lubbock. If we get a big rain, this ground flooded anyway because all the city water would run this way. Now it is cleaned, and as it passes down into the creeks, it's not as, we're able to hold some of it back the way the wetlands was designed. And what's neat is now we have some nature, there's ducks and geese out there, and there's actually a walking trail around it. So the community has really, really jumped in for it. And I am not 100%, but I think back when we did this program, the only way we could get funds was to improve the water quality runoff. I mean, there was no, you didn't have a chance to spend the money on some kind of other part of the project. That was one thing that, kind of forced us into doing the water quality runoff. But no, the community has really, really accepted it well. We've also just right on the front north border of this is a walking path that or a bike path that you can go 20 miles to the next community. So every day there's walkers and bikers, and they're going right by this wetlands. And our intent is to have the school kids go out there every spring or fall, whenever time of the year, and do some kind of classroom thing out there. And that was one thing that the DNR and the soil conservation people pushed for. And somebody commented about, your brother lives in Edroy. I know Edroy very well, as it's a big metropolis, and 20 minutes from Edroy will get you just about over to, it's half, I guess. You maybe live in Corpus, I don't know, but I'm familiar with the area very well. Sid Brew runs the gin there, and they were the ones that I helped out with their fertilizer application. Okay,
Awesome.
That's all I got, unless you got more questions.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you so much. A question for Kathy is, were the utility reduction incentives with permeable pavement geared towards residential, commercial, or industrial developers? And were there any that actually did implement permeable pavement that succeeded?
Yes, the drainage utility focused on, we just broke it down into two groups. It's residential and commercial. So pretty much if you're not a single family resident, you fell under commercial. And so our residential rate is a flat rate fee, and the commercial rate is actually based on a calculation very similar to what Austin did. And so if you have a large piece of property and you cover most of it, your drainage fee is going to be pretty substantial. We're still lower than Austin. We're a little bit lower than San Marcos, but not much. And so that the reduction for the permeable pavers is primarily for commercial, or is really only for commercial, because that's where it's a calculation. And sadly, no, nobody has taken me up on the offer. And I think a lot of it has to do with the only people I have contact with during that decision-making phase is the developer. I don't know who is going to end up renting the space or who actually is going to end up owning the space and paying that drainage utility. So it's very unfortunate. I wish there was a way that I could get a hold of whoever is actually going to be paying that drainage utility, because it will pay for itself. Because I mean, some of the drainage utility fees in some of the areas in town for the larger sites, they're over $2,000 a month. So if they were to rip out part of their parking lot and install permeable pavers, it would make a huge difference. And I've even offered to do the calculation for them. I just asked them if they provide me with the lot size, square foot of impervious cover, building, and I go from there, and I can actually give them a ballpark of what their monthly drainage utility fee would be. And most of them don't submit the information to me. It's very sad. It's very depressing. I haven't given up. I'm still very hopeful and very positive that things will change around. It's just educating people. And so I'm really trying to push the city of Kyle for us to do more projects so we can showcase it and say, look, it does work. Yes, this is the maintenance we do on it. And all those questions that people are just so hesitant to install green infrastructure, just answering those questions.
For sure, Kathy, I totally agree. I just want to jump in here because I think this is one of the really cool opportunities with kind of a statewide program for financing specifically nature-based infrastructures. It helps with the education, helps with teaching people what these features are and how successful they can be. I think there was one question earlier about, are there people who are against nature-based infrastructure? And the answer is no. I have not met a single person who is against building these kinds of features, but people do have questions about them. They wonder how well they work. They wonder what they are. And by educating people about it, I think we can get around some of these, all these stories that we hear of people not taking advantage of the incentives that are out there, by really kind of creating a statewide program and making sure people are educated about it.
I agree. I actually have ran into some developers and they just straight up refuse. They say it's going to cost them too much. It doesn't work. And I could provide all the information to them, but they just are not going to change their train of thought because their job is to get in, develop ahead of schedule, because then they'll get an incentive and get out. They're not the ones that are going to be living and staying and paying in these places. They're doing nothing but coming in, building, and leaving. And so that's where I have just such heartburn.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. So
Yeah, I think we really have to educate folks about, there's a new study just came out of Houston that shows that nature-based infrastructure is much less expensive than traditional infrastructure can be. And so making sure people actually understand that might, we can chip away at those developers who aren't willing to explore new ideas.
I agree. In fact, if y'all don't mind, I did see one of the questions was how will funding of nature-based infrastructure benefit a local economy? And I find that very interesting. If y'all don't mind, if I could answer that question. As soon as I saw that, Kyle is a funny city. Anybody that knows Kyle, they knew that in early 2000, there were 5,000 people and now we're at 50. So in 20 years, we have grown that fast. And, it was a very small rural town. And so for Kyle, really the reason it's grown is our proximity to Austin. And so we are primarily a bedroom community. It is people that work in Austin and commute and primarily just lay their head in Kyle. It's a very disengaged community for the most part. I mean, don't get me wrong, the community is amazing. It's a great community. But trying to get public engagement is a little difficult. It's actually, because it is a new city, you don't have a lot of people that were born and raised and have their roots there and are the people that really like to lead the charge. And it's not that our citizens don't care, it's just everybody's busy living their lives. And so I think nature-based infrastructure in Kyle would give Kyle a little bit more of an identity. And because it did grow so fast, we weren't thinking of nature-based infrastructure. Even 5 years ago when I started, 10 years ago, we definitely weren't. And that's when we were really growing. And Kyle struggles to have an identity. And I think having a livable community is what people are looking for now. And to me, nature-based infrastructure gives you that feel of a very livable, viable city that wants to pull you outside and wants you to walk around the town and wants you to enjoy the nature aspect of the city, not the parking lots, if that makes sense.
I agree with Kathy as well. I think the nature-based infrastructure is going to bring communities together, and like the walking parks and sidewalks and such as that. The city of Lubbock also is working to get a unified development code, which is going to bring some of the code of ordinances together and also, I think, help us in the areas with green infrastructure and low impact development. So that's another thing that we're encouraged about in the city of Lubbock. And looking at the benefit, I believe that Elizabeth asked about the funding of green infrastructure. I think that would definitely be beneficial for the city of Lubbock and other communities as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question is, have any of the communities applied for 319B grant funds from TCEQ or TSWCB for demonstration projects and or outreach or education, I guess, as a way to inform and educate people more about nature-based infrastructure?
I can speak for the city of Kyle, and actually we do have a 319 grant right now, and it is part of our huge wastewater treatment plant upgrade that we're doing. We are going to have an education building, and it's going to actually have lid features as part of that. So we're very excited about that. Of course, that's going to be the last thing that goes in. So it'll be very exciting for the city because this wastewater treatment plant upgrade or expansion is the largest project so far, or dollar-wise, that the city of Kyle has completed. So it's a big project for the city. And it's going to do wonders for water quality downstream, where our effluent is going to be a lot higher quality. Not that it's bad now. I mean, it's within permanent and everything, but it's just going to be a huge benefit for the community. And I think having that education center out there with a wastewater treatment plant is going to be a neat mix. But I'm one of the weird ones that likes wastewater treatment based on my past TCQ experience.
Awesome, thank you. And our last question for now is, how can nature-based features help combat climate change? Anna wants to talk about that.
All of the many benefits that we're going to see as we start implementing more and more nature-based infrastructure. I think the best thing about it is that it helps make our communities more resilient. I think Lisa put in the chat that, you know, nature-based infrastructure reduces the heat island effect. It helps with runoff, and it helps to kind of prevent flooding from frequent rainfall events. So there's just kind of a lot of different ways in which that works. But the more that we can increase the amount of green space, the more that we can increase the amount of permeable surfaces that allow stormwater to slow down and soak into the soil. That means that as we see these increasing rain events with climate change, we're going to be able to create more resilient communities and flood infrastructure that isn't damaged by those flood events. And I think one other piece that I find really interesting is that a lot of these features are actually really good carbon sinks as well. Often native grasses and the trees and the plants that are used in these features have really long roots that help water soak into the soil and also help store carbon and help actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere. There's a whole bunch of different ways that these features can help to combat climate change in our communities.
If anyone else has any more questions. Oh, yes, we found one. Perfect. Thank you, Susanna. Have any of your communities considered implementation of green or complete streets as a means of providing your communities the walkable, livable social opportunities while also addressing stormwater issues?
I can speak for the city of Kyle. Yes, we are definitely considering green streets. Anytime, I mean, with COVID, I actually had a couple things lined up because I'm really trying to show our city council, you know, some examples of where this is working and how it's working. And unfortunately, because of COVID, a lot of those things that I was actually planning in the spring, field trips and stuff like that got canceled. And so, yes, those are I have a whole board of wish list items that in hopes of moving Kyle in that direction. So, yes.
Awesome. And then we had a question. It's based off asking about the sponsored project funding. But to clarify, will this funding require an initial application for wastewater improvement project and then allow the use of interest money for GI, or can the initial application be used for GI or LID as well?
So that is a great question, and I think a really interesting one. The way it works in Iowa is that the community initially applies for a traditional wastewater loan through the state Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Ohio actually also has a similar program, and they allow other individuals to apply just for a sponsored project that is then matched with a wastewater project. And we can kind of, as we create this program here in Texas, we can help to shape what that'll look like here. But either way, that original larger project could involve green infrastructure and low impact development, as well as wastewater treatment. That's not excluded whatsoever. But then the sponsored project is something that's added on top of that original larger project. Does that answer the question? Perfect. That's awesome. And I would, if you're interested in helping to support this project, I would very much appreciate if everyone would just take a minute to add your name to our letter to help call on our elected officials and on our leaders here in Texas to create this program. So do we have any other questions, or Elena?
One was asked, what is the outreach being done to educate or inform the community to support your programs? And then also the link for the document needs to be accessible.
That's interesting. Apparently we're just having lots of technical difficulties tonight. Let me take a minute to fix that.
Yeah, well, I noticed, so at the very beginning of my internship, I had to do research on lots of communities in Texas and their different kind of either plans to implement nature-based infrastructure, or maybe any code or anything. And actually, when I looked at Lubbock's website, y'all had the most information just on your page about nature-based or low-impact development infrastructure. And again, I think some people said in the comments that one of the biggest issues with outreach and education is the lack of funding to do that, which would be, I think, a part of what could happen with more funding. And also the link should be fixed now. Yeah.
And I think outreach is, of course, a really important part of all of these projects, and that's what webinars like this are, going to be essential in helping to support, as well as, making sure we get out there and we talk to leaders like all of you and help get you informed and spread the word on really cool projects like this.
Well, yeah, if there's no other questions, I really just want to thank you all for coming today and spending this hour learning and hearing from everyone. I want to thank our speakers for sharing their information. And yeah, just thank you so much. And if you would want to support getting nature-based infrastructure funding, there is that form. And we've also recorded this webinar and it will be able to be sent out if anyone wants it. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a really, really great evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.